Welcome to the Get Published podcast, sponsored by Brodie Consulting Group. To get more information about our coaching, publishing, executive ghostwriting, and podcast production services, go to getpublishedpodcast.com. Hello, I am Paul Brodie, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Get Published podcast, where we help authors get published with a proven system that works. Today, we're being joined by Marlene Wagman Geller, author of Women Who Launch, Women Who Shattered Glass Ceilings. Marlene, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Are you ready to get started?
I certainly am.
All right. Question number 1. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to a first-time author who is currently writing their book?
Well, I think the first thing I would say to them is be indefatigable. Like, just keep going and don't listen to the naysayers who say, oh, you'll never do it, whatever. You have to just keep your eye on the prize. And the first thing is finish the book. And once that's done, you're halfway there. But note, I did say halfway there.
Absolutely. Just get on with it and get started.
Yeah. Right. So it's the essential first step. You type in the end, but then it's the beginning of the next process.
Absolutely. And what do you feel is the hardest part about getting published?
Well, I think the hardest part is to obtain a literary agent, because now that you finish the book, you have to get it out there. And if you send it to a publisher, it just ends up in the slush pile. So you need the intermediary of a literary agent who has the eye of a publisher. Because without that, unless you go the self-publishing route, you'll never get anywhere. So you have to write a killer cover letter. You have to get a killer cover letter and try to get the literary agent that's the best fit for your book.
So what is your advice in regards to obtaining a good literary agent that can help you with that process?
Well, what I did, because mine was nonfiction, I literally just typed in nonfiction literary agents, and then I wrote the best cover letter I could, because, they're just inundated with different tons of mail, so you have to make your cover letter just the best it could be, and then you just mail it out to agents that you feel will the best fit. And if you're fortunate enough to get responses, then you have to use due diligence and make sure that the literary agent is on the up and up. And just the rule of thumb is a good literary agent, like a good real estate agent, doesn't ask for any money. They just make a percentage of what you bring in.
So no flat fees, just a percentage.
Exactly, because as soon as they ask you for any money, it's a scam, because that's not the canon of ethics of a good literary agent.
Now, in regards to the cover letter, what are some things that you recommend that our listeners should potentially put on that?
Well, I think for a good cover letter, you have to start off with why your book is something that's not out there. Because if you want to get published, you have to write something that is not out there. So right away in the beginning, you have to whet their interest why there's a market niche for your book. So it has to be, of course, grammar-free, without grammar mistakes, spelling mistakes. So it has to be very well proofread, but it also has to be like, wow, this is something that's piqued my interest.
And just to be clear, you were talking about a cover letter, not a Q letter, right?
A cover letter, not a what?
A query letter.
They're one and the same, just different words for the same thing. The query letter, the cover letter, it's, the same.
Thank you. I just want to make sure we clarified that with our audience. So, because we talked about query letters quite a bit in our previous episodes.
Right. So, for the query letter, I just made it like it has to be one page, very succinct. And I did get a lot of response with mine, because I did take a lot of care, because you only get one chance at interesting the literary agent. If it's not a good cover letter, it's just going to go in the slush pile.
Yeah, it essentially has to be like a 30-second commercial, like an elevator pitch. Short, sweet, to the point, probably no more than 200 or 300 words.
Exactly. And if people go online, there is many samples of templates you can use. But I think that I started off with the template, but then you have to be creative because you want your letter to stand out from the rest.
Absolutely. Let's talk about marketing. So please share a marketing strategy that you have used in your book launch that worked well.
Well, I'm currently on my 8th book. So what I did was for my 7 other books, I kept the addresses and the emails of people who asked me to be on their radio shows or magazines that picked me up or blogs. And then I just used my due diligence. And as soon as I launch a new book, I right away contact the people who had used me on their prior shows and said, oh, I have a new book. Because, even if you write a great book, if nobody knows about it, it's not going to be reflected in the sales. So that's what I said earlier. Once you write the book, you're only halfway there, and now you can pitch it to an audience. And therein lies the rub, because that's the difficult part. To me, writing the book was a labor of love. The marketing, not so much so, but it was a necessary step.
Yeah, and that's a great point, especially for the listeners right now who have actually published several books, and if they've done media, to always keep a note of the different shows that they've done and to stay in contact with those people at least every 2 to 3 months. Give them an update, let them know what's going on. I'll give you an example. I was actually on a very well-known show called The Side Hustle Show with Nick Loper, and I had the privilege to be on that show early this year. His show has received over 5 million downloads, so kept in contact with him. He actually came on the show a few weeks ago, and we did an episode together, and then we talked again about my next book coming out and how I'd love to be on the show in the next month or so to be able to talk about that experience. So it's one of the best things, and also it's building those relationships that it's going to help you not only for 1 book, for 2 books or 3 books or even 5 books, especially when you have those launches coming up in the future.
Exactly. Just keep your contacts close, because if you establish a relationship, they're willing to have you back up, and you have to be out there in the media. I mean, the more you can do, the marketing wise, the better. Like if you can write blogs, have a social media platform. I mean, if you think about it, it could be endless how much you can market. I have a full-time job. I'm a high school English teacher, and then I write my book. So I have a slim margin of how much I could market, because it's endless how much you could market.
Yeah, I understand completely.
And
I was a teacher for 9 years,
right.
and my first 7 books, I was still teaching full-time, so I completely understand what you're talking about.
Exactly. I mean, and if people have the means, they can hire somebody to market their book, a full-time publicist. But then, that'll eat up a lot of the profit, because they tend to be pricey. So I just do it through, my social media, my old contacts, writing blogs, things like that. And of course, the publisher, part of their job is to also get it out there. So a lot of my radio or TV or blogs or online magazines is coming from my publicist at my publishing house.
Well, and it's nice that the publicist is helping you with that, because with a lot of different publishing houses, they don't necessarily give you that extra support. So that's great.
Yeah, I'm fortunate that way.
If you don't mind me asking, which publisher did you go with?
Well, I've had 3 different publishers. My first 3 books were from Penguin. My 4th one was Source Books. And my last 4th one was from Mango Publishing.
One thing I've noticed with Penguin and with Random House, they're the one publisher that really does give you that extra marketing support compared to a lot of the other traditional publishers that are out there.
Sure, absolutely. And, the power of the Penguin is that they have subsidiaries in the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, Canada. But, it's very, very hard to get Penguin. So, I mean, yeah, so if you can do that, they do a lot. But even then, even with the big 3 publishing houses, they tend to focus most of their attention on their big name publishers. And they will do something for the people lower down the ladder, but then still nobody pushes your baby like you do. It's your baby.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk about your favorite book. So what is your favorite book, and what was the number one thing that you learned from it?
Well, It's hard. A good mother loves all her children, but if I had to say, you mean the favorite book that I've read in my past?
Yes.
Well, I'm from Toronto in Canada originally, and we had a grade 13 there. And when I was in grade 13, we were reading The Great Gatsby, and I just fell in love with that book, and it made me decide to be an English teacher, and it also made me want to be a writer. So I had to say, F. Scott Fitzgerald, The Great Gatsby, really impacted me so much. And when I wrote my first book, it was a nod to the Fitzgerald. My first book was called Once Again to Zelda. It was a book on the story behind literary dedications, and that was the dedication of The Great Gatsby. So I'd have to definitely say it was that novel.
And what was the main thing that inspired you with that book? I mean, I know you talked about going into teaching, but was there something specifically that just had a huge wow factor?
Well, it was because when I read that book, it wasn't so much just the plot outline. It was also the beauty of the language. And I think what I learned isn't just what you say, it's the venue of how you say it. And his story was told in such like a poetry prose, and it captured me from the first word. So when I learned also in my writing to be cognizant, not just what I say, which is of course the skeleton, but the flesh on the skeleton is the beauty of the words, and it takes a long time to choose the right word because that makes the impact too. So the language and the message go hand in hand.
I agree completely. I'm a little biased myself. Great Gatsby is one of my favorite books as well, so I wanted to get a little extra info. I absolutely love that book. And for our final question, what is your favorite quote and why?
Well, I think my favorite quote in terms of writing is a quotation from Oscar Wilde, and he said, "The only thing worse than being talked about is not being talked about." And the reason that's my favorite quote in terms of writing is sometimes you're going to get a really painful review on Amazon or Goodreads, or if a friend is going to get a really painful review. And then I remember Oscar Wilde's quote, and he says, "But at least they're talking about you." So even negative publicity still generates talk. And so I always say when people are saying, "Oh, I'm so upset, somebody trashed my book," I go, "Yeah, but they're talking about you. So at least you pique some interest." So I think that, and I always use, when they feel upset, I always say, remember the Oscar Wilde quote, and it brings succor.
Yeah, I agree completely with that. I would much rather be polarizing than boring.
Exactly. And that was another Oscar Wilde quote, the one unforgivable sin, that of being boring. So I go, look, if they read your book, and that's the main thing, and you're not going to please all of the people all of the time, so take the people who like it and run with that.
The paraphrase one of my favorite quotes from Churchill, and it was, "You have enemies? Good. That means at some point you stood up for something in your life." Just to paraphrase that, and I always love that quote.
I love that too. Right, exactly. So, stand up for what you believe in, and then people won't always like you for it, but at least you have the guts to stand up.
Absolutely. Marlene, I want to thank you for being a guest on the show. What is the best way for people to find you online?
Well, the best way to find me online is I have an author webpage at marlenewagmangeller.com. I have a webpage at the same one. My email is once again to Zelda at hotmail.com, or Facebook at, again, Marlene Wagman Geller.
Marlene, thank you once
again.
And
I love hearing from...
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yes, and I love hearing from people. I love hearing from people, and I get back to them right away.
Well, Marlene, I want to thank you once again for being on the show, and I wish you all the best in your author journey ahead.
Thanks so much, Paul. I appreciate your help.
Thanks again for joining us today. To learn more about how you can be featured in our brand new Get Published business book, go to getpublishedpodcast.com.